Did you enjoy the Smalls at all?
Well, they're all different, you know. It was quite a change from the other stations. It was all right, yeah.
And that was the IOBs out there, the paraffin.
That was the IOBs, yeah, or PVBs, as they call them, yeah.
Can you explain what you had to do every day to keep these things going?
Well, if you had the morning watch, you had to put out. There was always plenty of brass work to do and polish the lens. That was done every day in those days, and odd jobs about the station.
What about the light itself? Did you have to prepare it for?
Pardon?
Did you have to prepare the light for the evening?
Oh yes, that was the lamp was a new lamp was put on every day, or a new head, and the other one was taken down and soaked in potash and washed, and the vaporizer all had to be cleaned every day, put back. That was all done, changed every day, so that I'd never known one of the PVB lamps to fail, because you had to prick out perhaps once during the night, but apart from that they were very reliable.
And the lenses were clockwork, weren't they?
That's right, yeah. Most of them floated on mercury, yes. Mm.
What was it, explosive fog signals?
Yes, the Smalls was explosive, that's right. Tow-night charges. South Bishop was siren, I think. And Skokholm was a siren or a reed, I don't know, I can't remember that. One of the but yeah, that was the first taste of rock light, 4 months.
Yeah.
Right, so from Flamborough, went home on leave for a bit, and then let's have a look. I have to do this. It's 49 years ago, so I've got to look through this to see where we went to next. The next one was an interesting lighthouse, Smalls. Small tower rock. I didn't mind it at all there, really. It's alright if you get on okay with your mates, as long as you don't gamble and argue about religion and politics, you get on okay. So that was the next one, the Smalls. I was there from the 14th of March to the 11th of May 1950, and I served there again on relief as SAK. It was interesting the second time because after the 2 months were up, as you know we did 2-month spells then, not month and month about, 2 months on, month ashore. The bloke who should have relieved me had gone sick, and I had a message come through from CG Holyhead, would I mind doing an extra month? Another month. Time drags a bit, but nevertheless, looking back on it, time really flies. So yes, I did the extra month. So I was actually on this one second time for 3 months. Nice few photographs here, alright, of the Smalls. Later I was to be appointed to assistant keeper. That was in early 1951.
What did they have on the station for the light and engines and stuff?
No engines on the Smalls. It had the light was a revolving triple flashing lenticular apparatus turning at 4 revolutions per minute, visibility 17 miles. Also a subsidiary light showing red and 19 feet below the main light. This shone over the Hats and Barrels rock. This was fixed, of course. The main light was a 75mm hood burner. The subsidiary light was a 50mm hood burner. And the revolving main lens, of course, was operated in the old-fashioned way by a hand-wound weight-driven clock. The light gave out 477,000 candle power. So you had to wind the clock up and keep pumping up the small pressure tanks, especially on...
So how often did you wind up? Can you remember?
About every hour.
Yeah.
If you forgot, as the weights came down, they triggered a bell, just to remind you. One place you didn't dare doze off at. The fog signal was interesting. This was an explosive fog signal. I think, if I'm correct, it went bang with a couple of 2-ounce tonite charges. So what you had to do when it was foggy was turn a wheel which lowered the jib that hung above the top of the lantern. Then you went out onto the gallery and connected 2 2-ounce tonite charges to the arms of this jib, went back inside the lantern, turned this wheel whereby the jib went sailing upwards, and you connected up the electrical connectors, because the 2-ounce tonite charges had a detonator in them. And then you wound up a clock which rang every 5 minutes. So when it rang, you pushed the plunger and bang went the explosive charge. Now, before you did this, one of the precautions was that you went down into the kitchen and drew the coal fire. That had to be put out. Put covers everywhere, all round the room, dust covers, because the first time the tonite charge went off, the concussion swept the chimney, in which case the kitchen got covered in soot. Wasn't too bad after that. Because anybody trying to sleep, night through this with a report going off every 5 minutes, you'd have to be dead. It was an interesting station. You could get off it, and low water, you could walk about on the landings and the rocks. One of the fellas that I was on with was a bloke called Clements, Jeff Clements. The fella in charge was a Ron Bevan. I noticed that later on, in December the 2nd, 1984, a keeper was sacked for protesting that the Smalls Lighthouse, the most remote in Britain, had no lavatory. John Clark, 32, used to have to climb to the lantern and use a bucket, then throw the contents over the side. Also, there was only a plastic bowl to wash in on the lighthouse, 21 miles off the Pembrokeshire coast, and he refused to work there after nearly a year of complaints. He was dismissed by his employers, Trinity House, following a disciplinary hearing. He's claiming unfair dismissal, and this went on. In October 1985, he got £1,800 compensation for this, for being wrongfully dismissed. An industrial tribunal in Cardiff upheld a complaint by John Clark that there was no bath, shower or flushing toilet. Well, actually there was a toilet in the Smalls, way down in the bowels of the building, if you'll excuse the pun, looking like a refugee from a medieval dungeon. We never used it, of course. There's nothing wrong with the Elson and the bucket. A nice big bowl of water to strip off in the lower light room, have a good wash down, no problem. When it come to emptying the bucket, if it was a nice day and one's mates were walking about on the landing stretching their legs, it was considered polite to go out onto the gallery and give them a whistle, and the sight of the outstretched bucket would ensure that they got out the road before you emptied the contents over the side, because due to wind eddies there was no sort of impact point that you could rely on. Yes, I didn't mind this place at all, the Smalls, better than the Wolf.
I went to Smalls after that, and then of course we got married. I left the job then and went into the RAF, and I got married on embarkation leave, and I before going overseas, and we had a short about 2 days honeymoon, and I never saw Megan again for about 18 months after we got married. And that was it. But at that time we did 2 months on and a month off, and it was quite it wasn't very nice for married families, married people at all. It was quite a long stint on the Lighthouse, actually.
So did you end up missing a lot of your kids' upbringing then?
Yes, we did actually, and of course obviously the thing was as well that the children were in the best of health when you were home on your month's leave, and when you were away they came down with everything from measles, the flu and all sorts of things, you know, and our wives had to be father and mother to the families, to the children, and well, at least that's what seemed to happen in my family anyway, that the children were always on their best behaviour when I was home. Smalls, I went to Smalls in about 1953, I think it was, 1953. And then I was about 18 months, nearly, I think about 18 months on the Smalls then.
Was it helicopters then or boats?
Oh no, it was boats then, of course, obviously. The helicopters didn't come in till the 70s. We used to do the relief by the old ship here, the Argus, and it was a 10-hour journey from Holyhead to the Smalls, and usually when the Argus put her nose out of Holyhead, it used to blow up anyway, and we'd be a few days perhaps on the Argus, sheltering in Milford Haven or Fishguard, Of course, it also had to do, besides the Smalls, it also had to do the South Bishop Lighthouse. It had to do Skocum, and as well as the Smalls. Of course, they'd always tried to do the Smalls first because that was the nasty place. And if there was a landing in Smalls, they would try to get there first.
Now, was the Smalls step off the boat, or was it a winch?
No, a step off the boat. It was.
I say step off the boat.
Yes. Yeah, step onto the onto the steps. You came off the boat onto the steps, and then up the steps onto the landing. And then of course we had a hand winch there then to take all the gear. Everything was piled on the landing. Then you see, and then we had to hand winch all the stuff up. The entrance door, of course, was about 20 feet up the tower, and we had one time we got all the gear washed overboard immediately it was landed, and the Argus had to go around salvaging all the what was floating, and we lost most of our food, except the stuff that floated in the boxes, of course, and all the tin stuff was saved. The vegetables, the bags of potatoes, of course, we never saw them again, and our meat was gone, and the Argus had to go into Milford Haven and restock us again.
So when I said step ashore, you quite often had to jump.
Oh yes, and it was quite a treacherous landing as well, because like the Wolf now, for instance, that was a landing where it was either on or off. With the Smalls, you could possibly do it. It might be quiet enough to do it, but while you were in there, it could turn nasty, and it was rather dangerous, to take chances, and it was very, very unreliable, really, unless it was a flat, calm day, of course, obviously. But the Wolf had no problems like that, because it was either you could do the relief or you couldn't. There were no half measures. They did one relief there on the Smalls one Christmas, apparently just before Christmas, and a big wave came over the back of the landing, and it swamped the boat, and the boat was all you could see of the boat was the top of the canopy and the coxswain's head, and the boat was still, he actually got the boat out of the gut, the engine was still running, and they dropped the other boat, of course, and they managed to tow it back to the ship, but the boat crew and the keepers were all marooned. There were about, I think it was about 5 keepers, and the boat crew, there were about 4 or 5 of them. They were all marooned on Smalls over Christmas, so it wasn't a very nice Christmas for them there, and of course the ship couldn't get near the landing for quite a while.
What was it like inside the Smalls?
At that time, in the 50s, it was quite roomy actually, and very, very comfortable at that time, because we had I think it was a Rayburn cooker, Rayburn stove, I think, in the kitchen, and it was. Of course, that heated the tower from the kitchen up, really, and it was quite warm. The room underneath the kitchen, that only had cupboards in it, big oak cupboards for our food. There was plenty of room there. The bunks, of course, were still the same as they are, well as they're were, today, like really. They were oak bunks curved with the wall, and four bunks they were. And then the service room then, of course, had a low light in the service room, and it had a desk, and a big high chair at the desk, and it was quite warm, and you kept your watch in the service room at that time, because not from sort of regulations, but it was quite comfortable to keep your watch there, and it was much easier to do that there, keep your watch in the service room. And it was, but then later on, of course, obviously, they when they modernised the Smalls, they put equipment everywhere, and the old desk disappeared, and the chair disappeared, lovely comfortable chair disappeared, and they had boxes on every little bit of space that they could find, and there was hardly room to swing a cat eventually in the Smalls.
Did you have fridges then?
No, in the beginning we didn't have fridges. The fridges came about the mid-50s, I think, or just before I left, I think. There were paraffin fridges, and they worked quite well. But before that, what we used to do was we used to do potted meat, like more or less tins of stewing beef now. But we used to do it ourselves. We used to cook the meat, and we used to cut up the stewing beef into pieces, and put them in jam jars, and then put dripping on top, and then heat the oven. The oven would be on the lowest setting possible, and we'd put all the jars in the bottom of the oven and leave them cook for hours, very, very slowly, of course, obviously, because any quicker and the glass would crack in the jam jars. Then after quite a long time, it was we took the jars out and let them cool, and you had when they cooled, you had a layer of dripping on top of the jar, and you had all your cooked meat underneath the fat, and that lasted you. There was no need to put that in the fridge, of course, because it was completely sealed by the fat. If there was a little bit of meat sticking out of the fat, you had to eat that straight away, well, more or less straight away, because otherwise that meat would go bad eventually, because on account of the that little piece sticking up through the fat. But if the fat was unbroken, you could keep that for months upon months, and it wouldn't go bad. And it was quite tasty as well, actually. Because the first day on the Lighthouse after you did your relief, of course, obviously everybody got out their stewing beef, and the table, it was like a butcher shop. Everybody was cutting up their stewing beef and putting them into the jam jars, and then that lasted you all a month.
Fresh fruit and veg if you're on 2 months.
Yeah, you got fruit, you got veg, of course, obviously, the month with you, and fresh fruit, and then when 1 month was up, of course, you reordered. Although you were staying for another month, you sent your order ashore via the radio telephone. And the grocer sent it out with the keeper who was coming out, to relieve the other keeper there who had done his 2 months. And
So you never
So
swapped?
you did actually have only 1 month's food at a time. You see, you didn't have to order the 2 months' food altogether. But obviously, of course, everybody ordered instead of ordering just 4 weeks supply of food. They ordered approximately at least 5 weeks supply, because during that time, of course, the reliefs were unreliable with the weather, and you could be overdue for weeks, a couple of weeks there. You see, so you always had to carry an extra supply of food. You see, in your cupboards. So everybody usually ordered about 5 weeks supply instead of 4. You see.
Did these vegetables keep well, or did you rely on tin stuff?
No, we used these what do they call them? Cow cabbages. These white cabbages, you know. They did last fairly well. The carrots usually went soft after a while, but of course, like a place on the Smalls, you couldn't bury them in a box of soil, you see, which would have kept them quite well. And so we did actually have a lot of tinned stuff, you see, tinned veg as well. Usually as well, what we did was we bought a leg of lamb each, you know, and of course you cooked that. You had to cook that leg of lamb straight away, and then you were eating cold lamb then until it went. So of course that's put me off cold lamb for ever since. I don't like cold lamb anymore. But and then when your meat was, you also bought a side of bacon or a piece of bacon and then you cut it according to your want. If you bought the rashers of bacon, of course, they wouldn't last as long as the piece of bacon, you see. And so it was just a standard practice then. When the fridges came in, of course, obviously, then it made life a little bit easier.
Most keepers drink tea. What about fresh milk out there?
Well, at that time in the 50s, of course, I think lots of people had the condensed milk was the great thing then, you see, and most keepers enjoyed their condensed milk, and we used to use that. We also had evaporated milk, which you could water down, and but it used to make excellent custard, actually. And fresh milk, of course, was more or less out of the question, really.
Right, you were telling me once about on the Smalls where the old stumps of the old lighthouse are. You went for a sunbathe. You remember that?
Oh yes, that's right. It was my afternoon in bed, actually, and I thought I'll go down on the landing. It was a glorious day, and I took my life jacket down, and I sat down the landing there, and eventually I put the life jacket under my head, and I dozed off. And what woke me up actually was my hand was in a pool of water, one of the holes in the rock where the old Smalls was built, where the old pile was a wooden pile was in this hole, and it was my hand was cold, and that's what woke me up. It was full of water, of course, this hole, and my watch was still going. I remember that clearly. And then I stood up, and it was still a glorious afternoon, flat calm, and I looked out on the horizon, and there was this little lump out on the horizon. It was right across the horizon, and I watched it, and it seemed to be getting closer, and there was no wave top or anything on it. It was just a lump. And I thought, well, I'll get to the base of the tower, and I went up the steps a bit and watched it coming closer and closer, and it was coming quite slowly. And eventually, when it hit the rock, it went right over the rock, right around the bottom of the tower. And if I'd been sleeping there, still on the rock, I'd have gone. And then after that, it was absolutely flat calm again all afternoon. It was as if nothing had ever happened. It was absolutely glorious. But there was just that one ripple, and it hit the rock with quite a force and straight over, and washed the rock completely.
That was like a tidal wave out of nowhere.
Well, yes, that's right. Yes, it was. And apparently, I've heard this happening before with keepers on the longships. Apparently, there were two keepers one day. They were there. They were both fishing and were on opposite sides of the rocks. And but this ripple came along, and apparently it washed one of the keepers off completely. And they never saw him again, and it didn't touch the other one. Of course, he was in a better position, and he never even noticed the other keeper had gone, apparently, until sometime later.
The first lighthouse on this site was a wooden tower built on legs. It was oak beams, 9 of them altogether to start with. And it stood for 80 years before being replaced by the new tower in 1861. So you had a central pillar of oak beam, which was about 46 feet, 14 metres long. They hand-drilled holes into the rock, into the reef. Then when it was inserted into these holes, it was sealed with melted lead, was the normal practice in those days. The wooden tower was about 65 feet high, 19.8 metres, and it contained on the top a sort of octagonal area for the keepers to live in, and above that the lantern. In the lantern, to start with, was 8 oil lamps with glass faceted reflectors. Then in about 1817 this was replaced with twice the number of lamps and parabolic reflectors. An incident happened at this lighthouse in about 1801 which changed the course of how many keepers were allowed on lighthouses. A Thomas Howell and a Thomas Griffith went out to do their duty. They were known to argue amongst themselves. And once out on the lighthouse, Thomas Griffith became ill and eventually died. Thomas Howell decided that he wouldn't get rid of the body by placing him in the sea, so he decided he would have to keep him in case people ashore accused him of murdering Thomas Griffith. So he constructed some sort of coffin from all the bits and pieces in his room, and then tied it to the railings outside the lantern. This was in the days of no radio link with the shore. All they had was flags, and at 20 miles away nobody was going to see the flags. So storms blew and storms blew and storms keep blowing. And eventually, when they finally got to the lighthouse to be able to relieve these much overdue keepers, they discovered one very dead one and one they deemed as mad. In the case of Thomas Howell being mad, they said that his friends and relatives couldn't recognize him and he was a broken man. We were told when we were lighthouse keepers under training that they then decided there would always be 3 keepers on a lighthouse. That was the tale we were told.